So hey anime fans, the series name is What If Naruto Got Harem with Invincible, so let's start the series. After cleaning up, Mark Grayson, who worked the night shift, was in the middle of throwing out the trash when one trash bag was thrown into the dumpster and the next was thrown so far into the night sky that it might have reached outer space. The day seemed normal enough, but the work hours were long and dull, and the pay was terrible. About time, Mark initially told himself, feeling a little proud and relieved. Although his father gave him the talk along with his origin story, the awkwardness of that conversation was offset by the wonder and awe of one day being able to fly and possessing his father's abilities. Nice throw, Mark objected, his teeth clenched to suppress a yell, and his eyes widened at what he had just heard behind him. The young Grayson was taken by surprise, and he turned around in time to see a person his age approaching, eating a partially consumed cheeseburger, and praising his throw. He was the same age as Mark and about the same height as him. He had short, cropped, bright blonde hair and bright blue eyes. His skin was light, but oddly, there were 3 dark lines on either side of his cheeks. He was dressed casually, wearing orange joggers, black and orange sneakers, and a black hoodie without a zipper that had a single large pocket at the stomach. His clothes appeared to be a size larger than him. He finished his cheeseburger and threw the wrapper inside the brown paper bag he was carrying. "Ugh," Mark began, clearing his throat, resting against the dumpster, and attempting to be calm as if he hadn't just thrown a garbage bag into space. Mark had no justification to offer. Someone knew he had superpowers and knew his appearance, so he said, "Damn it, I got nothing." In a desperate attempt to think of something, Mark thought. When the blonde noticed his friend becoming uneasy, he looked to the side and noticed a broken piece of bumper blocks. Mark witnessed the blonde pick up the piece and put it inside the bag, crumbling it and encircling the broken fragment. The alien hybrid then witnessed the blonde pull back his arm and toss the bag into the air, and it traveled as far as the garbage bag Mark had accidentally thrown into space. Mark gave the blonde a puzzled glance in return. Mark remarked, "Ugh, okay, so that just happened." Inquiring, "First time with powers?" the blonde. Mark said hesitantly, "Why yeah, first time with powers." He only said, "Cool, name's Naruto." Naruto waved 2 fingers to introduce himself. Mark deciphered the blonde's name, Naruto, and guessed that it sounded Asian. Since he was technically half Korean on his mother's side, he wasn't sure how to interpret that. Mark said, just raising his hand in a brief gesture. Naruto turned around and started to walk away before turning around again and said, "Well, Mark, I don't want to keep you busy, so, and a bit of some advice if you want it, the world's a little bit fragile if you aren't careful enough, so, good luck with that." Mark remained silent and listened to the blonde's advice, which caused him to reflect. However, the next thing that happened was that he saw the blonde leave, leaving a dust cloud in his wake. Was it teleportation or superspeed? That's really awesome, Mark thought. "Grayson, what are you doing out there? It's been 15 minutes. Mark rushed back to his job after realizing he had been outside longer than he should have. The camera began to record. Before the camera was tilted to face Naruto, who was holding the camera, the screen briefly shook. He waved and grinned toothily. "Hey to everyone seeing this video, I got something to ask you. Are you tired of heroes showing up at the last second?" Naruto responded, "Are you yourself in the middle of a life-threatening situation where you need assistance but can't? Are you at a point where you need some good vigilante justice to break the bones of some street thugs messing around in your neighborhood?" The screen turned white for no apparent reason, and the camera was unable to process what had truly happened. Naruto was walking down a busy street through a crowd of people when all of them suddenly disappeared. Suddenly, the camera picked up and saw that Naruto was leaning over the edge of a skyscraper, still smiling maniacally. As he pointed the camera forward, Naruto showed that he was at least 300 or 400 feet above the ground. The wind was howling against the camera from above, and sirens could be heard in the distance below. "Congratulations, you just managed to find my video where all those questions can be answered," said Naruto. Once more, the camera was unable to capture the complete sequence of events, and before long, Naruto was standing atop a mountain. The camera was pointed everywhere so that everyone watching his video could view a whole mountain range covered in white snow. "My name is Naruto and I'm a guy with superpowers, and among those superpowers is teleportation." Once more, the landscape changed so quickly that it was impossible for the camera to follow, and Naruto showed up in an unexpected location. It was strangely calm, and there was a gentle splash of water. The entire ocean was in front of the camera. "I can teleport anywhere in the world, I can reach you before the cops or superheroes could show up during a robbery, and what's even better, among my list of superpowers I can create physical copies of myself, meaning I can multitask with dozens to even hundreds of people all over the world, and all of my clones are equal to me in strength, meaning no kinds of handicaps when tackling other people with superpowers," Naruto explained after the screen shook when he moved the camera and aimed it down where he stood on the water's surface. "If you don't believe me, then look at these reviews thanks to my loyal patrons," Naruto said as he strolled leisurely on the lake, his phone's camera angled at him. "It's real. Holy shit, it's real. The guy's not kidding, he can teleport and more." Dozens of reviews scrolled down the screen until Naruto's smiling face was all that was visible. "My contact information is listed below. If you or your friends want a day without the hassle of superpowered threats or just the day-to-day troubles with common criminals, then please contact me. My prices vary depends on which region of the world you live in, and my teleportation may not be exact due my business being focused on major cities, so, what are you waiting for?" Naruto transported once more to make his point, and this time, his video would receive over 100 million views, solidifying its position as the most popular video globally. There was no noise, and everything was silent. The camera moved again, revealing Naruto standing on the moon's surface, completely exposed to the black void of space. Naruto, still grinning maniacally, cupped one hand to his mouth in the manner one would try to shout very loudly, and silently revealed the planet Earth with his camera phone. The stunning blue and green orb was perfectly motionless in the black void of space. "Call now." Bold text appears on the screen. PT1, friends go above and beyond for one another. Mark had just finished watching Naruto's video about his alleged teleporting business, and to be honest, the way he was using his abilities was brilliant. However, it did raise a question for Mark. Mark wondered what the specifics were for Naruto using his teleportation for financial gain. "Wait, what if someone tries to use you like a taxi service and asks if you could teleport them to the grocery store or something?" he asked. "I've already thought about, I only focus on people who are in the middle of bank robbery or terrorist attack." I made sure to explain that in the information below my video about the conditions there are for my services, Naruto said. When Naruto possessed all the typical superhero attributes, super strength, super speed, and flight, as well as the capacity to teleport, make copies of himself, and create fire, Mark found himself laughing, shaking his head, and expressing how broken he was. Naruto didn't seem to realize how powerful he truly was, in Mark's opinion. "Actually, it's not that broken," Naruto replied, "I can teleport anywhere in the world, but I have to leave special markers in the area in order for me to teleport back and forth. If there's a place I haven't been to, then I can't teleport there, so I need to physically be there for my teleportation to work. Which doesn't really mean anything considering the fact you have super speed and can fly at Mach 7, to which I still call hacks in our race. Mark yelled the final phrase. Naruto retorted just as loudly, taking a solid $100 bill out of his pocket and saying, "Don't listen to him, everybody, he's just being a sore loser." The two merely chuckled. The two were gliding through the air at their backs, arms behind their heads, and facing the sky above. It was nighttime, they were far from any artificial light source, and they could see the stars perfectly. Naruto and Mark had been flying at casual speed since their little race, and so far, it was just a moment to relax. They were using a subtle momentum that allowed them to glide rather than fly. Mark had a really pleasant day today. He got to beat the living daylights out of a person, and then he used his powers for something other than being a hero. Mark let out a deep sigh, but not out of relief. In a moment of reflection, Mark reflected on how he eventually acquired his powers. These initial weeks were a struggle as he struggled to decide what kind of hero he wanted to be. He wanted to be like his father, of course, but he also wanted to be his own hero, which is why he chose the name Invincible as his hero in the first place. It wasn't that Mark didn't have anyone to confide in. His best friend, William Clockwell, took care of that aspect of his life, and although Mark loved his friend, he knew he couldn't speak to him in complete confidence because Mark had powers and a superhero parent. The entire issue of a secret identity, etc. Additionally, despite the fact that it had only been a few weeks, Mark and Naruto were close. The other people Mark could talk to were either his parents, which isn't exactly a good mix when discussing something private and personal with your own mother. Perhaps it's because Naruto also possessed superpowers. Although he wasn't a hero in the traditional sense, his actions made him a hero in some ways. And that did leave Mark thinking of something from the past. Mark began by telling Naruto, "Naruto, I need you to follow me, there's something I want to try out before I make it home," which somewhat surprised the blonde. Naruto sensed that something was strange, though. Mark shook his head when Naruto inquired, "Something wrong?" Mark quickly took at Mach 5 without warning, and Naruto disregarded the sonic boom and followed at the same pace. At the request of the Invincibles, Naruto was taken to the Colorado Plateau, a vast area in the southwestern United States that was desert with mesas and other earthy wonders. The Grand Canyon, the Colorado River, and the Green River were all located in this area of the United States. Since the Colorado Plateau was a vast area, it didn't really matter where it was, but it was clearly isolated and devoid of people. Mark turned to Naruto after landing in a tiny meadow encircled by earthy barriers. "Naruto, this is gonna sound weird, but I need you to hit me as hard as you can," Mark said. For a minute, Naruto stared at Mark, his eyes slightly expanding as he tried to comprehend what he had heard. Mark was beginning to think that this might have been a mistake because it was abrupt, drastic, and it only reinforced his feelings of insecurity after his father had punched him the first time. He wanted to show his father that he could handle the pain and that he could handle anything his father could handle. "Mark, you must be ready for anything if you truly want to do what I do. Nobody will play tricks on you." Mark recalled his father's words, which were apologetic yet honest enough to make Mark feel guilty about not being more prepared. Naruto said, "Okay," which genuinely caused Mark to turn around. In an attempt to verify what he had just heard, Mark stammered, Really?" His father refused when Mark pleaded, demanded, and even challenged his own mother to try the same. God. He felt like a complete jerk when he thought about that, but this was the first time since he had powers that someone had agreed to what he wanted to do. Yeah, you got something on your mind, I might as well help you get it off your chest with whatever's got you down. Naruto was a friend, and it took Mark a moment to comprehend what he had heard before he began to chuckle. For a moment there I thought you were gonna say no and that we're friends and it wouldn't be right, Mark said. Oh no, I definitely would have said that too, it's just I know that look, and I get it, believe me I really, really get it, Naruto replied. Finally someone who could relate to Mark's feelings made him smile. Okay, so I want you to hit me as hard as you can, he said. Alright, but keep in mind that you requested this, Naruto said to Invincible. Mark witnessed Naruto reveal his entire hand and forearm by rolling up the sleeve to reveal his right arm. Every time he made a fist, Naruto's knuckles cracked as he flexed the muscles along his lower arm. He could see and feel his muscles tightening as much as his knuckles did, and he made his fist so hard that it turned white. A stream of chakra ran the length of his lower arm, strengthening it all the way up to the skin and down to the bone. Doton, Domo Earth Spear for Earth Release. When Mark noticed Naruto's skin and fingernails abruptly turning black, he had some questions for later. Naruto said, "Get ready," as he flattened and straightened his hand to imitate Kata's knife-like blow. Mark was on the verge of regretting asking this question, and now he had to make that choice when Naruto was truly utilizing his might against him. Surely, though, he wouldn't go all out, would he? Mark immediately followed Naruto's instructions. He inhaled deeply and stood erect, his muscles contracting and his upper body tensing. Naruto was really going to attack him? The way Naruto positioned his hand made Mark think, wait, are you doing the dash? Naruto's eyes were focused and sharp, and he placed the tip of his flattened hand only an inch over Mark's core with a frightening and silent speed. Naruto confirmed Mark's inquiry with a 1-inch punch before Mark had even finished speaking. And the results were strong. Naruto's fist indented into Invincible's stomach with an unseen pressure escaping from his back, and he coughed out large globs of blood before his body flew after him. Mark flew like a speeding bullet, tearing through the nearby rock and earth like wet paper. The blonde's fist ejected a thunderous boom as it met Mark's stomach, and the air rippled and collapsed, delivering a mixture of light and heat. Oh shit, he gasped silently. Naruto had not anticipated that Mark would fly with that blow. Instead, he thought he would have at least lost some of his base strength. However, Naruto used the Earth Spear to amplify it, which reduced his impressive strength to pitiful levels and hardened his skin to diamond. Ignoring the tiny puffs of smoke emanating from his knuckles, Naruto flew directly at Mark. Naruto observed that Mark had made a trench in the ground from above, which extended for several miles before coming to a stop at a big mesa. "Mark," said Naruto. Mark had slid out of it and was on his hands and knees when the half-human and half-Viltrumite began coughing up more blood. The site of impact was a massive round hole that sank deeply into the rock with a web of large fissures distributed all around the indent. Since Naruto was unaware of Mark's own healing element strength, he dared not allow Mark to endure such suffering. As Naruto knelt behind Mark and rested his right hand on his shoulder, he thought, I didn't think I'd have to use this. Mark was too preoccupied with the pain to notice Naruto's appearance or feel him reach out and grip his shoulder. Then, Mark felt relief. The human hybrid could still taste blood in his mouth, but it didn't feel like he was about to cough and throw up more blood anymore. He felt himself breathing much more easily and the pain was subsiding more quickly than Mark would have thought. Naruto urgently questioned, "Mark, do you feel any better, any more pain?" "I know I feel okay," Mark got up with his newfound power and felt far better than he should have. He was able to breathe even more easily than usual and even felt all of the pains in his neck go away. Mark abruptly pivoted on his toes and threw a few left and right jabs, seemingly forgetting that he had been almost knocked down by a single blow. "Wow, I feel better than normal, I feel amazing right now," he said. "I healed you up the moment I saw how bad I hurt you, sorry. You can heal, on second thought never mind." Despite the pain, life decisions, and the taste of blood in his mouth, Mark survived a punch that hit harder than his father did. He was proud of himself and afraid of what his friend could do. Invincible patted the hole that burned through his costume. "So, we're cool?" Mark had to ask. He did blame himself for not doing as Naruto had instructed or for how much he must have freaked out for what he did. Naruto suggested, "Yeah, we're cool, let's just not do that again," and Invincible gladly accepted. Point 2. I am a complete shinobi. When a shadow clone lived longer than it should have, say a few days, migraines and exhaustion would usually follow because of how much time and memory went back to the original. To be honest, Naruto didn't want anything to do with that. One of the benefits of the shadow clone technique, aside from making a copy of the user, was that it allowed the clones to last longer in combat and perform as much ninja technique as the original. This meant that the stronger shadow clones that Naruto made could create their own shadow clones to perform the teleporting rescue service he created. These were the lesser clones that dispelled once their task was completed, while the stronger ones remained. Once the day reached a certain time, the stronger clones would disperse and be replaced, preventing the usual issues. This was made even more feasible by the shadow clone technique's secret power, which was the telepathic connection that all clones had with the original. Naruto could communicate with his clones simultaneously and was aware of what they were doing. Naruto, the original, was training while his clones took care of his business. Naruto settled on a secluded island in the Pacific Ocean and used it as a training ground. Naturally, Naruto was free to leave his small island whenever he pleased. However, there were moments when the blonde simply wanted to observe the sights, whether from space, the sky, or while strolling among Earth's inhabitants. As Naruto stood on the beach with the waves crashing against his feet, his eyes were surrounded by a dark red pigment that changed their usual bright blue color to a golden amber. He was in a wide horse stance, throwing one punch forward and then another, hitting each with his left and right fists. Naruto's blows were so quick and forceful that they caused tiny shockwaves to burst from each blow. Several clones were training along the beach. During his training, Naruto stopped for an unknown reason, and it's likely that all of his clones felt the same way. Facing away from the ocean, Naruto moved his head to stare in a different direction. Strangely, something happened that left him wondering. Naruto had the ability to sense everything on Earth, including the 8 billion people who lived there as well as the monsters that lurked beneath the surface of the Earth and the ocean. He was killing them one by one, and the last of them lost consciousness shortly after. Naruto didn't care about these specific people, he just knew about them. Naruto sighed and carried on with his training, saying, it's probably nothing, I just wonder how Mark's gonna feel about his dad getting beat up like that. Pant, huff, huff. They were weak. Nolan Grayson had been thinking so after completing the first phase of his quest. The floor was covered in blood and covered in broken bones, organs, and entrails. Omni-Man, the strongest superhero on Earth, was standing in the center of the mangled corpses. After the battle with the Guardians of the Globe, Nolan was left on his knees, bruised and bloodied, his costume ripped, and he had to catch his breath before he passed out. The day after was rather straightforward, and everyone was largely ignorant of what had transpired the day before, with the exception of those who were informed. It only continued for the people in a random city where families laughed and had a good time. Many people had their normal daily troubles, but they only laughed at the people in front of them. It happened in a city plaza. Hundreds of green-skinned alien men emerged from a crimson, circular gateway that appeared out of nowhere and started shooting at the people. The invaders didn't care, they massacred men, women, and children to their glee. Their energy weapons pierced through them and burst them into confetti covered with human blood. A woman and her daughter were able to hide behind a sizable chunk of debris amid the devastation. The mother had shielded her daughter's eyes from the red paste that had once been the daughter's father, and they both trembled in terror. The woman's only concern was for her child's survival, and it took a lot of work to get over her fear, being cautious not to drop the phone in her bloodied hand and pressing the one tiny button designed for such circumstances. At first, the woman made fun of her husband for having a rescue button, but it now appeared that the moment had finally arrived to activate it. She heard more people yelling and cannons blowing up the buildings as shots were fired. That squelch, that squelch. When the mother heard the terrible noises of people exploding, she was afraid that she and her daughter would be the next to go, but then everything simply stopped. "You're safe now." When the mother felt a hand on her shoulder and gently squeezed it to get her to stop being afraid, she turned to see the blonde teenager from the video staring at her. He nodded slightly. Since he vanished in an instant, Naruto didn't say another thing. "Make as many shadow clones as possible and send them out around the whole city, we don't want more innocent people to get slaughtered," Naruto said as he gazed down at the town square, where some of his shadow clones were already assigned to aid the people he was supposed to save. Naruto commanded his clone reserve. Naruto made a well-known hand gesture by bringing his hands together. The technique of multi-shadow clone in Taju Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. Suddenly, a burst of smoke exploded across the surface of every tower that surrounded the city square. When they spotted hundreds of people as numerous as themselves standing on the outside of those buildings, the invaders stopped their rampage and their eyes widened. They were perplexed and didn't comprehend how they looked. Naruto was the one who attacked at that precise moment. Kill them all. Regardless of the situation, Naruto would always want to help innocent people. A pointless slaughter was terrible in his eyes, left a terrible taste in his mouth, and caused a rage to flare in his chest. His eyes flashed red, and he gave the order for all of his clones to kill the invaders. The first wave of shadow clones was created by Naruto, the original, with the mission of teleporting all of the innocent civilians who were still trapped in the city square. Once the civilians were gone, they would join the fight after being taken to a few safe zones, such as police stations or hospitals, which he would mark. The second wave of shadow clones was created to go and enter every building and move through every floor to teleport anyone who was stuck inside each building and safely teleport them to each safe zone. In addition to their energy-based firearms, these green-skinned aliens also brought large tanks with them, and they were simply shooting up and causing as much damage as they could. There was chaos in the city plaza. Alongside his clone brothers, Naruto was taking his fair share of hits. A few clones were stationed on the rooftops to watch the self-contained battle. They would cover anyone still trapped on the battlefield and relay anything they experienced via their telepathic link. Naruto didn't take the chance of using extensive jutsu technique, lest he accidentally capture an innocent civilian in his attacks. He was also correct to make plans in advance wherever he could. When the green-skinned bastard's eye exploded from inside the socket before being sent flying into the nearby building, Naruto smiled, satisfied, and threw the destroyed rebar to his side without bothering to follow. The real important thing was saving an elderly woman who had been caught in an earlier explosion. She was bloodied, bruised, and gravely injured, and each arm and leg had tattered ribbons of meat still dangling onto the bone. The renegade blonde quickly grabbed a piece of debris, a rebar protruded from a large piece of broken concrete, and used it like a hammer. A face-to-face with the giant makeshift hammer, the unidentified alien invader. With a growl, Naruto transferred the elderly woman and himself to the city's hospital in silence. People of all ages, hurt but still capable, filled the lobby. The paramedics took care of the seriously injured. While Naruto was looking at the elderly woman, the blonde realized that their level of medication wouldn't be enough to save her life, and Naruto sensed that her life was fading. Naruto's teleportation was smooth and soundless, and no one would have suspected his presence. The only reason they knew he was there was because he brought someone else with him and stayed longer than he would have. For the first few seconds when others could see him clearly, Naruto put his right palm on her wounded arm, disregarding the blood and concentrating on healing her. The hero would typically yell, "I need a doctor," when he saw someone so hurt, but Naruto did not do that. Everyone was perplexed as to why he simply put his hand on the injured woman's arm, and some even took out their phones to record, and what they saw could only be described as a miracle. The woman's arm and leg were forced back into place with an audible crunch, which made many cringe at the sound. It was even worse to watch, but soon after, the bone was fixed, the muscle grew back, and new flesh appeared, even causing the bruises to fade and allowing the unconscious woman to stir. All of it had been captured on camera and broadcast live. Naruto was unaware that his actions were causing the internet to tremble and that news was spreading more quickly than anyone could have predicted. Many people criticized the blonde for being self-centered for exploiting his abilities for financial gain, while others were unaware of his teleportation skills and would tell others that he was a real hero. After the mending process was complete, Naruto returned by teleportation. When Naruto returned to the rooftop where a kunai was embedded in the concrete, a simple paper tag was fastened to the ring-shaped pommel. Naruto was ready to engage in combat once more when he saw Mark, decked out in his invincible costume, charge into the fray without any prior plans. This made him groan inwardly, thinking that was him once. His phone buzzed at that moment, and upon first glance, a barrage of messages appeared on the screen. It was Mark's number, texting him about the alien invasion. Between his personal phone and his burner phones, Naruto recalled from his clone's own experience what happens when teleporting. It may take less than a second to move from one place to another, but the phone signal was disrupted upon disappearing into a gap in the space-time continuum. Naruto made an oof sound as he said, "Right, I forgot my teleporting interferes with the signal." Naruto exclaimed, "Oof," after Invincible was struck by a tank. Despite surviving the explosion, Invincible collided into a partially wrecked bus. Unbelievably, Naruto gambled on the idea of simply teleporting the Viltrumite hybrid because he wasn't sure if heroes changed their costumes. He could have still gotten past Invincible, but teleporting was quicker than sheer speed. Naruto teleported alongside Mark and the two of them to the rooftop. "Boss! Everyone is out, nobody will be around for at least 5 miles. Naruto. Plan now, cut down on chat time." At this moment, Naruto commanded all of his clones to enter the square. The first few hundred of them immediately seized the closest foot soldiers. Bunshin Daibakuha, excellent explosion clone. Every clone turned into their own suicide bomber and detonated, taking themselves and any nearby foot soldiers with them. There was no warning or gaudy trigger to signal their own self-detonation. Boom! 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 The blasts were so loud that Invincible could feel the structure he was standing on trembling, like fireworks at the start of the year. That amounted to more than 100 shadow clones and more than 100 explosions all at once. Naruto had already plummeted with Invincible following when the blast stopped. A dense cloud of smoke engulfed the majority of the area. Naruto waved his hand, causing a powerful wind gust to carry the smoke away. A lot of glass was shattered by the shock waves, but the explosions hadn't reached the foundation of the nearby buildings, and the remaining alien troops finally realized that they weren't winning the battle. Those who survived and stayed in battle the longest soon found themselves rapidly aging. The entire square was nearly destroyed, with a portion of the road sunken in, exposing the sewer beneath it. They were so tenacious minutes earlier, even after many of them were slain, that Naruto was more than prepared to send in more clones, but he was taken aback when the remaining invaders abruptly fled back into their red portals. Naruto thought, they're retreating. Given that he had done so in numerous confrontations previously, it made simple sense. Holy shit, Mark muttered to himself. Mark had been at a covert facility beneath the Pentagon where his father was receiving care. The Guardians of the Globe were dead, and his father had barely survived the attack, having been hospitalized by the assailant. It was frightening to Mark to see his father, the strongest man on the planet, in such a state, and to see his mother so devastated as well. When news broke that an attack had killed innocent people, Mark knew he had to be a hero for his father, a hero like his father. Before his friend Naruto grabbed him and teleported him out of the scene, Mark honestly didn't know what to do. It sounded good until the first few seconds before he was shot by a tank, crashed into a bus, and then fell onto a pool of blood and guts from people who hadn't been as fortunate in the attack. The blasts that shook the entire city below were the next thing Invincible knew. The heroes, or heroes in this case, won because an invasion was averted. Although it hurt a little to realize that all he had done was get shot, it was still preferable than witnessing a large number of people perish in front of him. Even so, Invincible thought, I wish I could have done something to help. Looking through his goggles, Invincible marveled at how Naruto, a half-human, half-Viltrumite, managed to repel an alien invasion in less than 20 minutes on his own. He didn't include his clones because, in theory, they were still him. They don't expect us to clean this, right? Naruto realized this after kicking a bit rumbling and knocking it into the tiny chasm in front of them. Naruto spoke out for Invincible to hear, and the half-Viltrumite shrugged as he looked back at him. Dude! It appeared as though a bomb had detonated here. The chance of a nuclear strike isn't theoretically out of the question when global safety is concerned, but should such an event occur, we would have been incinerated upon its detonation. Wait. It was rhetorical. What do you mean that it isn't impossible? Looking skyward, Naruto and Mark/Invincible noticed a flying object that resembled a futuristic motorcycle. Who are these individuals? Naruto questioned, glancing at Invincible and pointing. As Team, Invincible recognized them as such. Who? Despite wearing goggles to protect his eyes, Mark gave Naruto a puzzled expression and said, You really don't know about Team? Mark inquired. Should I? Naruto pondered. The 5 members of the team included Robot, a tall, lanky robot with wide, round green eyes and a head that resembled a skull. The majority of Robot's metal body was painted orange, which Naruto considered to be quite appealing. There was Duplicate, a pretty young lady with fair skin and short black hair styled in a bob cut. She was dressed in a form-fitting bodysuit with a dark purple top and lighter purple clothing throughout. Above her chest, a big number 1 was printed. Rex Splode was a man wearing an orange and yellow clothing that covered his entire body, with goggles, boots, and gloves covering him. His face was mostly exposed, and there were coin dispensers and pouches around his waist. Naruto was really enjoying their color scheme. Then there was Adam Eve, a pretty young lady with light skin and long orange hair, something Naruto really liked again, green eyes, and a pink outfit that included pink shorts that showed off her figure and pink boots. She also had the female symbol on her cape, but it was crossed with a pencil-thin X. The gloves were a light shade of pink, and they seemed to blend in with the dark pink top she was wearing. The majority of the teen team was astounded to see the extent of the city's devastation as the truck landed and everyone got off, with the exception of Adam Eve, who flew down. I detect no life signs whatsoever. It would appear the battle is already over, Robot said. You believe? Rex scoffed. Without Naruto and Invincible, who knew it was physically a battle zone, it appeared to them to be a figurative one. What have you people done here? Eve inquired, observing nothing but immense damage. Fearing he would be in trouble, Invincible replied hastily, I just got here. I was trying to help but I got my butt kicked, he said shamefully, clearing his mouth. Naruto reassured Mark, saying, don't hurt yourself thinking about it, man. Anyway, it was me. I hope that's not a problem, although he did raise his hand to indicate that he was the one responsible for the explosions. Robot said, it isn't. From what I was able to gather from the security footage, you single-handedly saved 300 people from in the city square and over 12,000 people in a 10-mile radius. Many owe you their lives, Naruto, referring to the number of people saved today. After searching for the blonde online, Robot was able to find his name. More than 12,000. Invincible stumbled, astonished that Naruto could save so many people in less than half an hour. I really need to step it up, Mark murmured, reflecting. Everyone on Teen Team was in awe of the blonde's speed and accuracy, even Robot. Then Naruto held up his hand once again and said, may I ask you a question? Naruto inquired. Of course, replied Robot. What happens now that I defeated the villains and largely saved the city? Naruto asked. Even if he might rescue lives, he didn't consider himself a hero because he didn't know what would happen to the city and its citizens after saving them. Robot gazed, and many others followed suit. The following day, Mark felt a little down after yesterday's events. An significant occasion didn't seem to have been so important after all. It was all well and good, but Mark couldn't help but feel that something important had been taken away from him. It made him feel like a little bit of a dick, more like a burden, and he should be walking it off because over 12,000 people were okay, even though he wasn't the one who saved them. The Guardians of the Globe were dead, and his father was in the hospital. With that kind of news, it had been, in the moment, when Mark decided he had to be the hero and save the people who were being attacked. The blonde's obsession with orange was absurd, but beneath that smile and that carefree demeanor, Mark saw how serious and heroic Naruto could be. Naruto really is amazing though, Mark thought, having never realized it before. The way things had been going over the past few weeks, Naruto acted so casually every time they hung out and hardly looked like the type to go about being serious. Mark laughed a little inside when Naruto pulled a few practical jokes on him. Additionally, unlike a hero, Naruto's name was not accompanied by any exalted announcements beyond what the internet claims. Instead, it was primarily amateur video that repeatedly reenacted his valiant actions. A hero. Mark pondered the term once more, attempting to understand what it truly meant. Naruto was a hero, but he didn't flaunt it. Mark? Whoa, how are you? When William noticed the bangs beneath his friend's eyes, he gasped. Since his father was still in the hospital, Mark hadn't slept all that much, not because of the other day. My dad, he got attacked, Mark said, still reeling from the news, and he felt that his best buddy should at least be aware of it. What? William gasped, shocked and terrified to hear something like that. You're kidding. Mark avoided looking him in the eye. Gosh, you're serious. Is he all right? What took place? Mark's inability to tell William the complete truth was one of the drawbacks of having a superhuman persona. It made him feel embarrassed, but Mark knew there were dangers. He's in the hospital, they're doing their best, but it's messed up, he's really hurt, Mark acknowledged. It was a half-truth, but it was meant to fill in the gaps in case someone was suspicious. Jesus, Mark, I'm very sorry, William said in his heartfelt condolences. Did they arrest the perpetrator? No, not yet, was the sour response to the question of who might have harmed his father. Mark felt a twinge of rage knowing that the person responsible for his father's harm was still alive. Perhaps he need to take action. When Mark gave the matter more thought, he drowned out what William had said, but then he caught a glimpse of a crown of dazzling golden hair out of the corner of his eye. Naruto was speaking to two females in the school hallway, and both of them were somewhat shocked. Mark noticed that other kids were chatting loudly and shooting pictures with their phones out everywhere. Naruto, Mark whispered softly, did he even attend this school? The Viltrumite hybrid hadn't anticipated the blonde simply showing up at his school. When Naruto turned back and saw Mark, he waved his superhuman hearing. William remarked, no way, it's the dreamboat from the news earlier. Mark waved back, disregarding the remark about the dreamboat. Mark, Naruto struck Mark with his fist, causing a bump. Why are you here, Naruto? Mark inquired. Naruto said, I thought it might be fun to pay a visit because I've never been to a high school before, but everyone has been giving me really weird looks. As he looked over his shoulder, he noticed that more and more students were taking pictures of him, which made him feel a little uneasy. Are you not aware of the news of the day? Because of yesterday's events, you're everywhere, Mark explained. Am I? Yeah, William remained mute as he observed the two engaging in back-and-forth talk before interjecting. William cleared his throat and said, ahem. Oh, right, Naruto, this is my best friend, William Clockwell. William, this is my friend Naruto. Naruto grinned and extended his hand, saying, any friend of Mark is a friend of mine. William shook his head and stumbled, same, it's really nice to meet you, Sir Sir Narnar, he said. It gets difficult for people to say it, but it's Naruto, Naruto corrected simply. You got it, Naruto. It's a pleasure to meet you. Your actions for all of those folks were incredibly amazing. Thanks, I guess, Naruto answered, feeling a little ashamed of how much his fellow teenager was complimenting him. Mark even chuckled at his closest friend because of how anxious he was. How do you know Mark, then, out of the sudden, William cautiously inquired, and everything collapsed. Mark hadn't considered having a superhero link of any type. Was there a rule for one? People would probably suspect Naruto, who was very well known online and didn't wear a mask. It happened by accident when I teleported to the Burger Mart where Mark works. Some guys were threatening to jump him, but I handled it before it got ugly. I thought I'd visit him occasionally to make sure those same guys don't try anything. I also keep telling people that working overnight can be extremely dangerous, you know. The half-Viltrumite didn't think William would believe it, but he did, and William was shocked to hear it. Mark then repeated the lie, which was the most seamless lie he had ever heard. "Thank you, Guy, but I have school until this afternoon. Perhaps we can get together then." It was impolite, but Mark was concerned about what people would think if he was hanging out with someone so well-known and identifiable. The markings on his cheeks were a clear sign that he was anxious to get Naruto to understand that it would be best if he went right away. Naruto assumed Mark simply didn't have the time, but it slipped his mind what Mark was actually asking him. "I don't see why not. Guess I caught you at a bad time. I don't know how the school system works here. Should I leave you a clone at Burger Mart or would you rather send me text when you're ready?" "I'll text." Naruto gave it a thumbs up. "Got it." William wanted to ask more questions, so they left quickly. Naruto told himself, I definitely caught him on a bad time, and he was about to get up and go if it weren't for the attractive orange-haired female. Samantha Eve Wilkins was chatting to a friend when the friend appeared to be having a panic attack before pointing. Eve had not anticipated the blonde from yesterday to suddenly appear at her school, and he definitely attracted attention. People were snapping pictures and keeping quiet in an attempt to prevent themselves and others from creating a scene, but they were unsuccessful. When Eve saw him talking to some of the girls, who were blushing and stuttering, she raised a sensitive eyebrow. He certainly had those boyish good looks, but she assumed that was because he was currently the most popular person on social media. Eve recalled that he was dressed up in his orange joggers and black hoodie, the loose clothing appearing a little too big for him. Two men, but one wearing a blue collared shirt, caught the blonde's attention. The two appeared to be friends, yet the man appeared to be in a panic. How strange. They said their goodbyes quickly, and Eve took advantage of the chance to talk to the blonde. "Hey, would you mind if we spoke for a little while?" Eve inquired. "Sure," Naruto said plainly. Eve realized that she hadn't planned ahead when she brought the blonde out here on the school rooftop. She had forgotten to introduce herself, and she realized that the well-known yellow-haired, bright blue-eyed hero didn't know who she was. He teleported yesterday shortly after, and he most likely agreed just to avoid coming across as impolite. William was asking his friend a lot of questions while Naruto and Eve were talking since Mark had been in such a hurry to avoid drawing attention to himself that he had forgotten that class wouldn't begin for another few minutes. Whispering, "I'm Adam Eve, Eve." Well, Naruto was unable to comprehend. "Adam Eve," Eve reiterated, "the girl in pink from yesterday, the pink-clad one." "Right, you're the girl that's lit up like a Christmas tree," Naruto remarked, scratching his temple in an attempt to understand what she was talking about. However, he drew on his memories and recognized the girl based on the color of her hair rather than the color of her clothing. Eve's lips were pursed and her brow was furrowed as she tried to think of how she would react to it. "Your powers, you're letting out so much energy that it looks like I'm staring at a Christmas tree," Naruto said, observing her bewildered expression. Eve was taken aback by that. "You can sense my powers?" "Yes, it makes me question your strength," Naruto pondered. Even organic material would wane under her might, but when she reached the peak of her powers 6 years ago, the universe seemed to have unraveled for her to control and manipulate however she wished. 6 years later, though, Eve couldn't replicate that same feeling, but she felt the connection to her powers way better than when she was 12. For her, it was like seeing everything underneath, like a mechanic seeing underneath a car's hood. She even gained some insight into other people's personalities from that incident 6 years earlier. If she concentrated, she could sense the blonde's raw energy, and it was undoubtedly chaotic. He was radiating more energy than a nuclear reactor. After a brief period of meaningless conversation, Eve discovered that Naruto was quite casual about himself and his abilities. At that moment, they began talking about one of Naruto's abilities. Eve had been given a brief overview of Naruto's teleportation. She was curious about the blonde's abilities, and oddly, he seemed very open about them. He broke down the limitations of his teleportation, which weren't exactly that big of a deal. He could teleport anyone and anything without needing to be the physical medium for said teleportation. Anything he touched could be sent anywhere he wanted as long as it was an area Naruto had marked, or it could just be summoned to him as long as it had that marker you mentioned. Eve realized that there weren't really any limitations in the first place. That sounds pretty broken, Eve said, acknowledging that having such a power would undoubtedly be useful against opponents and necessities for whoever possessed it. For example, if you were fighting someone, you could send them to the middle of space with a single blow to the face. Then there was the simple task of getting necessities like groceries. Simply grab the bag and send it to your kitchen while you choose to do something else entirely. Really, why does it sound so absurd? Can't you rearrange things on the molecular level? Mark remarked. As Naruto noted, you can create anything you set your mind to. That's hard to dispute when you explained how you teleport. Creating a hole in the space-time continuum would essentially mean anywhere in time regardless of space between you and your marker. I saw your video about how you teleported to the moon. If I'm right, you could teleport anywhere in the universe, Eve replied. Which I would have to physically travel in order to mark each and every place I've been, and that's just a lot of effort, replied Naruto. Before Eve pointed something out, there was a pause in which it appeared as though Naruto had won their little game of wit. Can't you clone yourself, though? Why not simply assign all the work to a clone? Naruto's face wrinkled slightly as he considered whether it would be feasible to have a clone perform all of the work in space. He had made all of his clones do the majority of the work in his small rescue service, and it was more along the lines of ensuring that people would be killed if his clones did nothing. At least he would be compensated for his efforts, and people would still be saved. He would actually like to see what Jupiter looked like on one of its moons. Naruto admitted, okay, maybe you're right. For the time being, Naruto and Eve were deep in conversation. Eve had planned to start a conversation with the blonde, but her curiosity overcame her. The reason she did this was because Robot had asked her to try to see if the blonde would come to their base. The orange mechanical being was interested in yesterday's events because Naruto was able to teleport thousands of people in such a short period of time. Team wasn't opposed to the notion, but they also didn't have any intentions to invite others join their group. The fact that Naruto showed up at Eve's school was entirely coincidental, and Eve made it up as she went along. After raising his palm and teleporting a 12-pack of orange soda, Naruto drank it with a single, sharp click and raised the remaining one up for Eve, offering. With a "why not" shrug, Eve accepted one for herself. Her lips were chilled by another crisp click and cold orange flavor. Before teleporting the remaining cans back to his kitchen counter, Naruto grabbed an additional one for himself. I apologize for diverting your attention, Naruto said. What was it you intended to ask me? Eve set her soda can next to her. I wanted to ask if you'd be willing to come with me to meet the rest of my team, after school that is. I still got a couple more classes to do before then. I don't see why not. Can my friend Mark come along too? Naruto said. Mark? The person you spoke with? Does he possess any abilities? Eve inquired. It took the superhero with the pink motif to realize that Mark Grayson was the main reason Naruto was at Eve's school. Yeah, he was the guy in the yellow and blue suit. Was he there? Naruto leaned closer and whispered, he calls himself Invincible, after nodding. Eve laughed a little and said, PFT, sounds a little optimistic. I stated precisely that. Naruto chuckled before going on. Naruto gave a two-fingered salute and said, see you when your schoolwork's finished, Eve, before teleporting away in an instant. The two exchanged contact details. After the blonde went, Eve hummed to herself, sweet hair, she said. Cecil Stedman was already in the center of the city square that had been attacked yesterday. GDA agents were sifting through the area to salvage what they could, whether it was the withered pieces of alien flesh or the leftover alien technology that had been dropped from the battle. The square was already being rebuilt, and although the paperwork that followed would be a pain in the ass, at least some good grace came out of it. That didn't make it any easier, though, and Cecil preferred this area to the mess in Guardians headquarters. The fact that he needed replacements for the Guardians of the Globe was another factor. Cecil knew that once people learned that their global icons were dead, the crime rate would undoubtedly skyrocket, and the scarred man snarled in response. Whoever killed the Guardians of the Globe would undoubtedly pay a heavy price for the chaos they caused, but that would have to wait until then. Cecil knew that he needed to be patient and focused, and that focus was right here with a future member in the works. It had been a straightforward assumption that the GDA director didn't dismiss, Teen Team hadn't defeated the invaders, that distinction belonged to the teleporting blonde who defeated an entire army in record time. I will admit I was taken back at your request for me to help assist in the Global Defense Agency. It is an honor, but I can't help but believe there may be another reason why you called me, Robot said. And it was that information that slightly altered the game. The reason I brought you here was because you're the only one so far that might have a read on the kid, Cecil said, turning around with his arms crossed after he had been strolling across the destroyed square with Robot by his side. Me? A robot asked. The GDA has already looked into the kid to see what his story's about, and for the most part he just seemed like some glorified Uber driver who can teleport. Whatever brought him up most of the time was because how we viewed over his profile. We've looked over his credentials, fingerprints, dental work, address, ID, everything in the book just to figure out who he was underneath, Cecil said. And, Robot inquired, sincerely interested. Cecil said icily, nothing, not a goddamn thing, nothing. That's astonishing, particularly considering the GDA's resources. Somehow the kids managed to stay off the grid so well that the only lead we have is the video he made 8 months ago, and it only stops there, everything else is a blank. So, what are you looking for from me? Asked Robot, truly perplexed. How do you feel about him? Cecil responded, but he added a query since he wanted to at least find out Robot's viewpoint. I only knew him for a few minutes, anything I could provide to the discussion is very limited, however, I believe the other one might be able to answer that question. Invincible, in your opinion? Cecil's eyebrows went up. It would appear that the two know each other and seem to be friends from what I was able to deduce, Robot said, nodding despite his first thinking that it sounded a bit optimistic. So, what do you think of the blonde's performance from yesterday? Very impressive actually. I looked through the security footage and surveillance cameras throughout the area and found that Naruto was able to show a great level of strategic planning. He created over a few hundred duplications of himself and utilized his teleportation to teleport every last man, woman and child across a 10-mile radius away from the battlefield. Over 12,000 people were instantly teleported less than 30 minutes from when the battle started and ended. Once he made sure no innocent civilian would be caught with whatever the blonde had done, somehow, he was able to detonate his copies. Despite the damage done to the city square, the damage to the city overall was minimal with only 38 casualties, which is an optimal number compared to the people he did save. It takes $5 million of taxpayers' money every time the GDA uses it, and the kid spams the shit out of it for 30 minutes straight. and on top of that he stopped an invasion before it even began, Cecil thought, acknowledging that things were becoming difficult and that they might get worse in the long run. Already, Cecil thought the blonde could prove to be useful, perhaps more so than Mark despite being the son of the most powerful man on Earth. It was a high praise that Robot felt was well deserved, and he acknowledged this. The other one, how was it? Robot stared back at Cecil as he questioned. When his scanners picked up something, Robot bent his head and said, "It would appear we have company. I have no sufficient data on Invincible, still green on all accounts, but shows eagerness. There is potential in that, though I believe he may not know the realer aspects of the job." When they glanced together, they recognized the orange joggers and blonde hair. Naruto returned to the main plaza following his brief conversation with Eve. It didn't make much sense why the invaders retreated, but the original wanted to investigate the situation instead of letting a clone do the work this time. Naruto killed more than his share of foot soldiers during that battle between the clones he used, but the invaders still kept pouring through the portals. If they were that indifferent to their lives, why retreat at all? When Naruto returned to the square via teleportation, he spotted trucks and individuals who didn't appear to be civilians and who appeared to be cleaning up the area. Naruto simply shrugged it off and mostly disregarded them because it didn't involve him. Naruto initially refrained from using a jutsu that was overpowering or ostentatious. At the time, he only used 2 jutsu, and the green-skinned invaders only targeted Naruto and his clones, using the other shadow clones he possessed to teleport the surrounding civilians using the Hiraishi no Jutsu Flying Thunder God technique. The idea of using kunai and shuriken, which were amplified with wind-infused chakra to increase their sharpness and lethality, which weren't ostentatious when used in close-quarters combat, was also considered. Although Naruto didn't use ninjutsu, he still possessed taijutsu, and he was superhuman after all, destroying most with his speed and brute strength. A bird's-eye view would suggest that things were getting worse because of how many more soldiers were pouring through the red portals, but Naruto knew he could easily match their numbers regardless of how many soldiers came through the red portals by the second. As the minutes passed and the seconds increased, he watched as more and more soldiers poured out of those red portals despite how many Naruto had killed. Naruto trained constantly even after arriving on Earth, and even though it had been a while since he had experienced real combat, the difficult lessons he had learned back home readily came back to him. In order to avoid regretting his decision later, Naruto needed to plan before storming in. This caused a phantom agony to shoot down his arm. His worldly friends would undoubtedly be critical of him, or worse. In actuality, Naruto's plan was primarily to ensure that innocent people wouldn't be caught in the fight after he tried anything. He also had a moral compass, which prevented him from simply killing innocent people. Naruto's choice developed into a plan, and he was able to move as many people as he could from every building and the streets. Naruto quickly adopted that concept utilizing the clone Great Explosion. It was highly destructive and erratic, and Naruto liked it. When the first 100 clones exploded, they combined to form a single, enormous explosion that killed half of the opposing soldiers and damaged a large area of the square. When Naruto realized how determined the Flaxans were to take over the planet, he felt no sympathy because the memories were often delayed and usually concealed well within the blonde's mind. It was only when he was able to concentrate that he was able to recall every detail because of his clones. The shadow clones were him in every way in terms of power and capability, and they were also able to sense negative emotions and malicious intent. Naruto's sensory perception, when it really mattered, could even go so far as to enable him to read other people's thoughts, which is how he remembered the name, the Flaxans. Beneath everything, Naruto saw and felt the evil that they all were. It was such a shock to the blonde's senses that it made her physically ill and disgusted at how they enjoyed each kill they were able to get with the first 24 people they killed. It caused such uncanny anger that he teleported those particular aliens to a distant part of the planet at his command. Naruto's response was so violent that he ordered his clones to use a fire release on those unforgeable sods that he melted their armor onto their skin, then ordered them to rip the melted armor off their bodies. The level of savagery shocked even Naruto. However, it must have been nothing, Naruto reasoned, as it was a just penalty for such egregious wickedness. Naruto simply shook his head and went back to work. The task at hand was crucial, and he had a purpose for going back to Ground Zero, where he concentrated on a single item that was directly in front of him. It was the area from which the red portals opened. Although the city's roadways connected to the region, the portals opened up precisely here. The Flaxens were able to transcend space-time and arrive from another realm. Some armed guards positioned themselves around the blonde, but Naruto ignored them because he could already feel them even though they were wearing special technology that made them invisible. The people who were around him and saw him were upset that he was just standing there, staring blankly. Naruto tapped at his chin. Naruto had already encountered space-time anomalies, particularly during the Fourth Great Shinobi World War, which he experienced after the age of 16. Naruto was becoming distracted and clicked his tongue. Examining the tension between the folds of space-time with a long, hard stare, Naruto was unable to see it and had to rely on his senses to help him. However, he was able to visualize what he was looking at. Space-time holes typically don't survive long. If they don't heal, they may have negative effects nearby or, worse, they may still be accessible from the opposite side. Naruto had more than enough life experience to last a lifetime. I have to take care of it, Naruto informed himself gravely, because the Flaxens aren't going to stop trying to take over the earth. Naruto needed the strength for what lay ahead, so he gently retreated one step and prepared himself. Eve was correct in their previous discussion of Naruto's teleportation. He could reach his target at any moment and from any distance. Normally, the Hiraishin had limitations when teleporting. Naruto need a marker, but Naruto had that marker. Some Flaxens adopted his father's battle strategy and branded every Flaxen they came across, thanks to Naruto's shadow clones and their own initiative. The Flaxens who survived and went back to their home dimension took the marker with them, giving Naruto access to the Flaxen's dimension, which they believed to be the Hiraishin's ultimate teleporting power. With his muscles tensing and his fists clenching, Naruto informed himself, "There's no holding back on this one." He was prepared. "Naruto, I see you are doing well." The blonde almost tripped over his own feet as all the tension that had been building evaporated. "Oh no! Oh no, you know better than to interrupt someone in the middle of their activity." Of course, he couldn't be entirely at fault when he couldn't sense the presence from a literal robot. Naruto may not have been able to sense the machine the same way he could sense a person, but he could still hear the heavy footsteps and clanking of metal hitting the ground. It was Robot, still amazing with that orange color he sported. And there was a person with Robot, an older man wearing a sharp business suit and red necktie. Naruto didn't know who it was, but there was a large scar on one side of his face, mostly at the corner of his mouth. "I'm sorry, I didn't know you were doing something," Robot said. "It just seemed like you were just staring out into space." Naruto cleared his throat, erasing any shame he may have had just now. No, it's all right, I got too caught up with something," he said. "So, what brings you over here, Robot, and, sure, I don't know your name," Naruto gestured. Cecil introduced himself as Cecil Stedman, Director of the Global Defense Agency, and Naruto shook his hand politely. Naruto acknowledged, "I've never heard of it, but it sounds fancy. What can I do for you, Mr. Cecil?" "I apologize, but I don't really care about niceties. May I simply call you Cecil?" "Might as well." Cecil dismissed it with a wave. "What can I do for you then?" Cecil was not above complimenting. He was aware that the previous day could have been much worse, and the blonde performed better than most in such a short period of time. "I wanted to give my thanks. You saved a lot of people, got damn near every last person you could find in that shit storm the other day and took out a whole lot of those bastards with whatever you did," Cecil said. "Thank you," Naruto said lightly, possibly not knowing quite how to react to that. After all, Cecil was a stranger. "So, Naruto, why are you out here?" a robot inquired. "Right, I was just about to visit the Flaxen's dimension," Naruto said, tapping the palm of his other hand with the bottom of his fist in silence as a reminder. "What?" Cecil asked. "The Flaxens," Robot said to Cecil, "they're the ones who invaded the square yesterday. I was able to understand their language after extensive scans from the footage I gathered, though I am surprised you know their name too, Naruto." Naruto didn't hesitate to reveal, "I was able to read their minds in the middle of the fight yesterday." The GDA director made a mental note about the blonde and proceeded to investigate further. Cecil and Robot looked at what they had heard for a long time, processing it. They weren't bothered that someone could read someone's mind, it was just a slight surprise to them knowing that the blonde could do so given his powers. And he definitely had a lot of powers based on what they reviewed about the blonde. Cecil was a little worried. "Well, did you learn anything significant from what you read?" Robot pondered, mentally reviewing a list of the blonde's powers, which so far had increased to 6. Naruto firmly denied, "Nope," saying, "I was going to enter their dimension and show them not to mess with Earth because all they wanted was to just kill every last human on Earth and conquer it." Naruto pointed his thumb over his shoulder. "Don't you think that's reaching just a bit?" Cecil asked, raising a brow. "There must be an entire world full of those jerks." Naruto joked, "Nah, I'd win, I've dealt with worse." "Curious," said the robot, "though I must admit it is a bold move. Surely you wouldn't have come to this decision if it wasn't necessary." "I did, when I read their minds. I also sensed what their intentions too. They're never going to let the Earth go until they have it." The upbeat tone he gave, and an icy comment as well. They were going to come back, and time moves differently in another dimension. It could be 100 years for them. And they've probably been building their army the entire time we've been here for just a day. Dude, Cecil silently cursed when he heard that, wondering how he had failed to consider how time functions differently. He had been preoccupied with the Guardians' deaths and hadn't even considered another attack, and if the blonde's statement was accurate, another invasion was closer than first believed. "And in spite of this likelihood, you still intend to break into their house?" Uncertain if the thought was nearly mad, the robot asked. "Like I said, I'd win," Naruto said with a shit-eating grin. Sensing that too much time was being wasted, Naruto took action and teleported without saying a word. Neither Robot nor Cecil knew what was happening on the other side, and in reality, both Robot and Cecil had their doubts despite what he could read from the information he had gathered.